Greetings in Christ. My name is Bishop Nectarios, and I am a bishop of the Orthodox Patriarchate of Nations. So today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about faith, which is a very expansive topic. And I wanted to give you a little bit about how I came to faith in the hopes that my testimonial might be able to assist you in your own search for God. So let me give you a little bit of background about me. I was born in the Church of England, and very early on in my adult life, the behavior of Christians chased me out of my faith. And for a long time, I kind of wandered through things. I was an atheist and then an agnostic. And then I started to become an interfaith minister, and I got into the practice of deliverance ministry, exorcism. And through committing and performing exorcisms, I started to really get a sense of just what exactly was out there and what worked and what didn't work. Because when you're in that kind of a non-denominational environment, interfaith environment, there is very little in the way of guidance. I mean, you get a few websites with, instructions to pray and to keep on praying. And if you're lucky, you get something approaching a method. And I started to do a little bit of research because I felt that there was more than where I was at. And, I had walked through a number of religions, as I said, on my way back home to becoming a Christian, including at one time I was a pagan, atheist, and agnostic, and I was afraid of God. My view was that, first off, I was a infinitely replaceable cog in a much bigger machine. And I also felt conversely that Christians are following the path that Christ laid out. But Christians are total jerks to each other sometimes and often. And I figured if they're following the path that Christ has laid out and they are just awful to each other, and Christ is the epitome of that path that they are following, well, then Christ has to be the epitome of what it is that these Christians are doing. And it took me a very long time to realize first that Christ and Christians are two separate things, that they're trying to follow his path. But like all mortal creatures, we're all fallible, and we're all going to fall short. So what led me to faith, to the journey that led me to faith, actually, it's like 15 minutes before 15 minutes. I started noticing in my life that I was getting stressed out about all these various things that were happening in my life, different struggles. And often enough, these things were resolving themselves, really even without any input on my part. So I started keeping a journal of when these things happened, and I said I was going to call them miraculously timed coincidences. And what happened as I started keeping notes and paying attention to the pattern in my life, I started to see a clearly defined pattern. And after, I think, 30 or 40 different accounts of this happening, I simply lost the journal and didn't bother to get a new one. After a while, you have a pattern that is playing out again and again and again. It's no longer a coincidence, and you stop calling it a coincidence. If you walk out into the street and you almost get hit by a car 30 or 40 times, sooner or later you're going to say, let's not walk out into the street. You're going to learn that there are cars in the street. And in the same way, through studying the pattern that was made available in my life, I started to come to grips with the fact that there was something more than just the world around me, than what I physically saw, which led to the question, what is that? And that led me from atheist to agnostic. And then I still wasn't comfortable with Christians at this point, mind you. I hadn't yet had that realization that Christ and Christians are two separate things, and that the behavior of Christians does not reflect on the love that Christ has for all. So I started looking at different religions and trying a few out, trying to see if this was where I belonged. for a long time I was with paganism, because that offered me a way to embrace something that felt divine on my own terms without surrender or without giving in, a way to try to control everything around me, if that makes any sense. Because, as I said, there was still a massive lack of trust on my part. And what ended up happening is one day I go into the interfaith ministry because the pagan faith is largely a reconstruction of what they have available about previous pagan religious traditions, and it spends so much time being worried about Christianity, and Christianity barely notices its existence except as a footnote. So, as an interfaith minister, still searching for the truth, I ended up meeting a fellow named Bishop Corey Blake out of Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, Corey was a man that had been on those groups and forums for a long time. And I talked to him a little bit and I told him about my story, what it is that I had done, what it is that I'm looking to do. And he outlined a couple of things that I would later come to understand, but at the time did not understand at all, concerning the behavior of Christians, how people interact and treat each other, how God sees us. And based off of these simple conversations, and there wasn't even a lot of them, he introduced me to a group called Unity Catholic Church, which was a Western Orthodox Church that was properly what they call Old Roman Catholic. In other words, it was the faith of the Roman Catholic Church back when it was united with the Orthodox Church. So, with this understanding of this Western Orthodox faith, this was something I could absolutely return to. This was something that seemed to lack a lot of the militant, judgmental behavior that seems so very common in Western Christian tradition. And early on in my time, a bishop by the name of David Pasqua gave me a book called Becoming Orthodox, which is a fantastic book. It's written by the Archpriest Kilkist, who is now blessed memory. And it was the story of the evangelical church, 2,000 of them, as they reunited with Orthodoxy. And it is a fantastic book if you ever have a chance. I'm ordering another copy of it because I gave my copy away some time ago, but it is just a fantastic book and a great introduction to Orthodoxy if you ever have a chance. So, this led me in the direction of going more and more and more towards Orthodoxy as opposed to the old Roman Catholic / Western Orthodox that was the nature of Unity Catholic Church. And those were beautiful people. There was nothing wrong with them. There was nothing wrong with the way that they went about their faith. They were essentially fully Orthodox. But here's the problem. They weren't embracing the fullness of Orthodoxy. They were trapped within the confines of Western Rite Catholicism. Now, I don't mean they were celebrating a Western liturgy and this is bad. I mean that they were unable to break away from the stereotypes that most churches in the West were forced to. And as a result, their theology was slowly going into the Roman Catholic spectrum as opposed to the Orthodox spectrum. And as new generations of clergy were educated and ordained, it became more and more common as clergy came to us from a background that was Roman Catholic or evangelical as opposed to Orthodox. So over time, I made it a point to return to full Orthodoxy as opposed to old Roman Catholicism / Western Orthodox. And I have the greatest respect for them to this day. But in the end, my journey to faith, as I stand now, was one where it was nurtured by people. My return to Christianity was almost like a spiritual clue by four upside the head. At the time, I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing, but in 2020 hindsight, it made all perfect sense. I mean, you could see the exact path going through time, and you can see how perfectly it was lined up without any knowledge on my part where I was going or what I was doing. And it all began simply enough with that interfaith ministry and with performing exorcisms and learning that there absolutely is a Christian God and there absolutely is demons and there is a devil and there is hell and there is heaven, and that these things exist in not some abstract form but in my daily life. And that changed things because it went from a matter of questioning faith to a matter of absolute certainty. There are these things out there. I need to discover for myself what is the purest representation of Christian faith as practiced by Christ, the apostles, and the primitive church. So I went through history and I started looking at what was written. And I saw right off the bat that the Protestants had made innovations, the Roman Catholics had made innovations into the faith. It was the Orthodox, who are these bunch of crusty, stubborn, grouchy guys out in the desert and in the mountains, that had preserved the faith in its purest form, although people will argue with me on that, and that's okay. And so little things, like, Bishop Corey introducing me to the church and getting me started in a faith community that was supportive of me and gave me the background knowledge for what was to come. And you would look at this path and you'd think it's like looking at a road that's zigzaggy, but at the time it certainly seemed that way. But in 2020 hindsight, again, it's a straight path. And through all of it, I had to have faith based on the absolute knowledge that I gained from exorcism of the existence of God, and that wherever I was going, God had the helm because I had no clue, whatever. And now with Orthodoxy, it feels like I've landed on distant shores, so to speak. But at the same time, those distant shores are like my forefathers' homeland, and I'm returning home among my people. So it's a strange sensation for me to finally be home. Now, the point of this story was that, as I said, through all this, I needed to have faith that God was going to guide me in the right direction because I had no clue where I was going or what I was doing. I was obedient, I was good and kind as best as I was able, and I failed a dozen times at that, and I'll fail a dozen more. And that faith, that faith had to come up with love of God, because if you don't love someone, you're not going to trust them. You had to have trust of God, meaning the understanding and knowledge that God knows what to do, has the tools to do it, and will do it. You have to have the hope in God that God knows you, God loves you and cares for you, and God will take action in your life. And so all of these parts came together: faith, hope, love, trust, to push me in the direction where I've gone now. And since I was received into Orthodoxy, it's not that my journey has changed. It's that instead of being the seeker, I have changed to really delving into what is available to me, this wealth of spiritual wisdom and knowledge. There's a lifetime of, well, several lifetimes just in the Philokalia. There's 1,100 years of it in there. And if I didn't have faith in God and if I didn't trust in God, none of this would have been possible. None of this long, long, long journey would have been possible. And the rewards were worth it. If I didn't trust in God, I wouldn't have trusted that those rewards would have been worth it. If I didn't hope in God's capabilities and power in my life, then I wouldn't have even bothered, because if it was hopeless, what's the point? And if you don't trust God, then you're not going to place your life in His hands. And that's what faith is. Faith is hope, love, and trust. And we see it on earth and we see it in heaven. When we love someone and we trust them and we place our hope in them, it can sometimes be as simple as when you're preparing for a wedding. You have faith that your wife will show up at the wedding. You have trust that this is what is right. And you have trust in her. And you have trust in the fact that the marriage is good. And you have hope. Not just in what's going to happen, but what's going to be in the future. Faith, hope, love, and trust. All together into the word faith, which scarcely seems enough. I mean, I could make 5 more videos about faith, trying to tell you more than just my own personal example of how faith entered into my life, how I first began to understand what faith was, how faith was exposed to me, and the journey I had to go to where I could be in a place where I could trust in that faith. I mean, I've lost a lot on this journey, and it was because I was having the things that were distractions stripped away from me piece by piece. The ego that I had surrounded me with, the attitudes that I had adopted were being stripped from me one by one by one by one until I was finally coachable, until I was finally ready. And none of that was possible without that faith. And this is a difficult thing that I'm telling you about because it means that you have to be vulnerable before God. And it means that you have to be willing to take risks, and you need to be willing to follow God into the desert where you have no idea where you're going and you rely solely on God to guide you. And that's a very difficult thing because our society doesn't encourage people to have blind faith in anything. But if you know God, love God, trust in God, it's not really blind faith, but that's how it's perceived. This journey that I've used as an example of faith is really the easiest way for me to try to explain it to you. I could give you the dictionary version of it. I could give you the writings of the saints on it. And they're very beautiful accounts. But I would be reading words on a paper to you. Instead, what I wanted to do with this video was I wanted to outline how I came to have faith from my very first early steps and the questions that I had and the methods that I used to start to identify that there was really something more than me going on in the world, and then my journey to seek out what that was, and how all through this little process there were little situations like Bishop Corey Blake introducing me to Unity Catholic Church, Bishop David Pasqua giving me the book Becoming Orthodox, which led me on the journey home to Orthodoxy and to not my resting place for sure, but definitely my place of love. What's the word? I don't want to use the word resting place because that makes it sound like I'm going to sit around and do absolutely nothing. And instead, this is the place where I am alive. This is the place where I find contentment, where I find joy in the bosom of Orthodoxy. And I don't ever want to leave. I don't want to go anywhere else. As a matter of fact, I want to dive headfirst into the writings of the saints, into the traditions of the church. I want to dive into the history. I want to embrace my faith with the same kind of absolute love that I read about in not only in scriptures, but in the behavior of primitive Christians. And that is a beautiful thing. And imagine being in the home of your forefathers and realizing that your family's home never really left, that there is a place for you among your forefathers' people as if you were born and raised among them. It's a very different feeling. And none of this is possible without faith. And if this is the reward at 35 for all of the work that I've spent, all the time that I've spent following God. Can you imagine what's going to be in 40, at 50, at 60, at 70, et cetera, ad nauseum? Have faith. God loves you, and I love you. So if you're joining the channel for the first time, please hit the like and subscribe button. I'm putting out videos every Wednesday and Friday, and I am just coming up with new ideas for videos all the time. I'm having new video ideas put forward to me, and I would love to hear what your thoughts are on how you came to faith and what methods you used to figure out that there was something greater than yourself in the world. And as always, keep our discussions within the bounds of Christian love and kindness. So that's it for today. I hope that my testimony on the matter of faith will be something that is inspiring, at the very least, might give you some ideas that you can try in your own life to either deepen your faith or to expand on what your understanding of faith is, or to maybe even come to faith yourself. So, take care. God bless.